And we're recording. So, hi, Jennifer. Welcome. We're really excited to have you. So, what I'll kind of start with is, just give us an overview about your path, your education, and your current position.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So when I was I'll start with just undergrad. I went to San Diego State, started there as a freshman, and I went straight into studying psychology. That has always been my interest. And so I went right in with that, just kind of from the get-go, was super interested in just the brain and people and just how, everything works. So that's kind of where I started. I bounced all around in as far as like my interests and what I thought I wanted to do with it. I started off like really being pushed by my mom to do like IO psychology. She was like, you'd be great in HR. There's so many financial like benefits to going that route. But after a while, I kind of decided that that's not the route that I wanted to go. I wanted to work. My interest was working with kids. So obviously not something that you can do in HR unless you have a very company. So, but at the same time, I was like really trying to avoid going to graduate school. Like that for me just did not appeal, the whole process. I was like, I don't want to look for letters of rec. I don't want to take the GREs. Like that sounds horrible. So I really like did not consider that until about, I would say like midway through my junior year. I was like, crap, I shouldn't have written that off. Like now I'm kind of scrambling. And so I started to study for my GREs. I took the GRE. I felt good about it, but then like applications came up and I was like, I have no idea what programs I want to apply to. Like I was working in the psych advising office. So like I had a pretty decent understanding of like what the different programs were, but I just did not know which one I wanted to do. And so I was like really torn between like going for my marriage and family therapy degree or if I wanted to go the social work route. And the applications were so different. And to me, I just did not understand like for my personal like benefit, what would be the best way for me to go and like what kind of jobs each one like would rule out for me. And so I ended up saying like, I'm not going to do it right now. I don't have enough experience even to apply for the MSW. Like I'm just going to put that on pause. And so then I decided to just start volunteering my senior year and like I was going to just take a year off. That kind of became my plan. So I started volunteering for San Diego Youth Services at their emergency shelter for teens who are homeless or runaways. And I did that once a week for a year and it was amazing. That's where I first started to like interact with like at-risk populations and learn from like the people who worked there, like who were working on their masters and kind of like what they like to do. And they were, learning to be therapists. And so I was like, that's kind of where I was like, okay, I really feel like social work could be an option for me because that's what the degrees that they were working on. And then what really solidified it for me was I met for coffee with a family friend who works as a school social worker in the Escondido Unified School District. And she just like completely blew me away, like with all the things that she got to do, like her day to day sounded incredible. And so that's kind of where I was like, okay, I feel like social work is the best spot for me. So during this time, I was applying for jobs. Like when I met for coffee with her, I was like just graduated and started applying for jobs. And I ended up getting a job for with the Therapeutic Behavioral Services program at New Alternatives. So for those of you who aren't familiar, because I was not familiar at all, New Alternatives is a nonprofit like organization in San Diego, and they have a ton of different programs. So Therapeutic Behavioral Services, or TBS, is one program that they have. They also have group homes. They do family visitation for kids in foster care. So they have a ton of different programs. But for my program, TBS, what I really drew me to it was as like a bachelor's level, you could work like hands-on experience with kids at risk. And so I think that was really unique because a lot of the jobs that I had seen, like working with those populations, you needed to have a higher level of education. So that for me, like really drew me to that. And so I ended up working for them as a behavior coach. That's like what their position is at the bachelor's level. And essentially you go into Bless you. As a behavior coach, like I got to have a caseload of clients. I think it was between like 5 and 7 clients. I would see most of them multiple times a week, and I would go into their homes, and based on what the treatment plan was that I didn't create, I would kind of follow the treatment plan, work on the goals that had been set for them. And really it's working in addition to therapy. So they're already seeing a therapist, and we're just working on those goals in home essentially. So not doing therapy, but like similar activities, especially with kids, because a lot of kids, when they see a therapist, it's a lot of like play therapy. So it's like some of the same modalities, just not like actually as a therapist. So I thought that that was really awesome. And while I was working there, I gathered all of my hours that I needed to apply for my master's in social work. So I ended up applying for that and got into the MSW program at San Diego State, which was amazing. I also applied for San Marcos, but ended up choosing San Diego State because that was my alma mater, and I, of course, love that school. So I went back to school. I like stopped my job because as an MSW student, you're going to be doing internships and classes, and so for me, that was like too much to have a job also. So I just kind of fully committed to school. And then as an MSW, what's really interesting, you know, compared to other programs, like my friends who have done the MFT program, you start off, you do an internship right out of the gate. And so that's something that's different than MFT. At least from all of the people that I know who have done MFT, they usually do a whole year of classes and then they do one internship. MSWs, you go straight into an internship. So I got matched with an internship based on my application and like my interests and things like that. And then you do a second year internship on your second year, and that's where you get to choose your internship and apply for whatever one you want. So I went in and started my internship at a county mental health program for severely mentally ill adults. So that was like super out of my scope. Like I did not feel comfortable whatsoever, but I was just kind of thrown into it and given a caseload and was like, okay, you're going to be a therapist now, like right out of the bat. I think I had like maybe 4 weeks of classes before I actually started seeing clients as a therapist. And I was like, I feel very underqualified for this. But that's just how it goes. And I had a really great supervisor who was like really encouraging, and my clients were wonderful because I mean, for me as a very young person giving therapy to older adults who have severe mental illness, I was like, I have no life experience. They're not going to respect me, or like, you know, but as a therapist, you're not giving advice, like you're helping them uncover like some of their thought patterns that are negative, and you're kind of highlighting different things that they're saying, like you're not giving advice. So I felt like once I kind of figured that out, it became easier, and just being like super supportive. So I worked there for a year, got a lot of really interesting experience, and then went back to my kind of main interest was working with kids. So I applied to be a school social worker, and I got a position at Chula Vista Elementary School District, and I got to work in 3 different schools. So each day, I had like 3 days of internship, so each day I went to a different school, and I absolutely loved that. I was doing individual counseling, I was doing group counseling, I was doing classroom push-ins, or basically classroom lessons where you go in and you teach like social and emotional skills to kids, like to all the kids in the classroom. I was participating in IEP meetings and 504 meetings, and just like talking with like the different teachers. It was just such an amazing experience. I loved that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's eventually like what I want to get back to. That's like my kind of career goal. But coming right out of school, like those jobs are a little bit difficult to get. They're pretty like far and few between, because kind of once you get a school social work job, like people tend to hold on to them.
Yeah.
So there were a couple positions open once I graduated, but I didn't end up going for them because I really just wanted to get started on my hours, and they weren't going to start those jobs until like the fall essentially. And so I was like, I don't want to wait a whole summer to start working and making money and getting my hours. So I just started applying like right away for other jobs. And I ended up back at my program TBS as a case manager. So that was, it was pretty awesome. I got the job really fast just because I knew everybody, which was really nice. And it was an easy adjustment. But as a case manager now, obviously my job looks a little bit different for the same program. So what I'm doing is I basically oversee each case. So when I get a referral gets assigned to me, I do the assessment. So I go out to the homes and I meet with the family and I talk with the therapist and I do like the whole comprehensive assessment and kind of figure out what the case plan is going to be, how we're going to meet the goals that we have set as a team. And then I kind of relay all that information to the coaches. And then throughout the case, I do all the coordination between like treatment providers, so their therapists, if they have somebody working with them at school, if they have a social worker, those sorts of things. I do all the meetings, I facilitate all the meetings, and I keep a lot of contact with the parents. And then I also collaborate with the coaches to kind of make sure everyone is on the same page with everything, with incidents that occur and with things that we want to try as a team. So that's what my day-to-day looks like. Specifically, like for my clients, just so you guys know, like kind of what clients we work with at TBS. I work with children who are at risk for losing their placement. So what that specifically means is that they are at risk for either they're in a foster home and they're at risk for losing their foster placement because of behaviors that have been really challenging, which happens unfortunately a lot for some of our foster kiddos. They're at risk for psychiatric hospitalization. So they, you know, have a lot of like suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors that like keep ending them up in the hospital. And so we go in to try to prevent that kind of cycle of them going into the hospital. We also work with kids who are in group homes already and that maybe we're trying to help them get a handle on their behavior so they can transition out of a group home, because in California now, you're not supposed to be in a group home for longer than 6 months. It's supposed to be temporary. So we're trying to like basically help get them out of that, that like placement. And we're also trying to help kids not go into group homes. So kids who are maybe at risk for going into a group home because they can't find a successful foster placement for them. We're trying to get them to be able to be successfully in a foster placement. So I work with a lot of foster kids, but I also work with a lot of kids who like just are really low income and families don't have a lot of skills or experience. Maybe there's like some intergenerational trauma that has happened that, you know, that family is perpetuating. And so we're trying to intervene and make that, that cycle stop.
Man, that's a lot and so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. There's some, like, it's very challenging, I won't lie, especially like being the person who doesn't get to like actually do all the interventions because I'm not the therapist, and that's kind of the role that I have been before. And so I have all these ideas about what I would do if I was the therapist. And, you know, sometimes I'm really fortunate to work with therapists who are awesome. Like I have several cases I work with Rady Children's and their outpatient psychiatry like program as a therapist, and they are awesome. I love those therapists. But sometimes you work with therapists who aren't, you know, that aren't supported by their team, and they don't like really seem to have as much like knowledge about what to really do, and it's hard to like not be in the position to step in. But again, this is kind of where I'm learning, you know, for my experience, and moving forward, you know, getting my hours and getting to be licensed eventually is the goal, and hopefully work back in that role kind of in the school-based setting would be awesome.
Awesome. That is so awesome. I'm just going to say awesome because I personally actually want to go back and get my degree in social work. So
do you?
I do. It's never too late, you guys.
Never.
So going back a little bit, you mentioned, you kind of briefly touched on considering MFT, but ultimately decided social work. What was the like determining factor there?
So I think, as I talked about, I had coffee with my like family friend who's a social worker, and so she kind of like told me that about how social work is just a little bit broader in the like application like factor. So when you are going into social work, you in the program you learn about, therapy and things like that, but you also you learn about like community organizing and, some other kind of like facets of social work that MFTs don't really get a broad like scope of education on, like that kind of factors. Like they're really just focused on therapy. And for me, like I like therapy, but I also don't want to just be in an office all the time, just providing therapy. And I think social work, from my understanding and from what I've learned from her and from my experiences, that social work is really, there's so many applications of social work. I felt personally that MFT was too limiting because I wasn't 100% sure that I just wanted to be a therapist. Now, I also have learned that since I made that decision, there are a lot of jobs that will hire either an MFT or a social worker. So for example, my job right now, most of my team of case managers who I work with are MFTs. So like in my specific job, that's not limiting at all. A lot of the therapists that I work with are MFTs. But like school social workers, I don't know how often they hire MFTs. Because school social work, for what like I really wanted to do, is a lot of that community organizing kind of piece tied into it. And so if they have a school social work position, like having an MSW degree or a social work license is kind of stronger in that sense. So for my personal career goals and learning about her job and like how amazing that sounded, that's kind of why I went that route.
Absolutely. It also, shoot, I totally just blanked on my question. Social work. Oh, it also sounds like social work might be a little bit more collaborative than an MFT, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it depends on the setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the program itself definitely is really collaborative.
Absolutely. And I think also another thing that you mentioned that I think is really important for students, especially who are interested in therapy, to understand is that therapy is not giving advice, like you mentioned, right? Like that can actually make you very liable as a clinician if you give advice and it doesn't work out, or, people are going to interpret that advice a different way. So can you talk a little bit more about like that kind of training and what therapy really is?
Yes. So that's like the number one thing that you learn, like your first semester, is like, you do not give advice as a therapist. Like you said, it does make you liable, and that's not really our goal. Our goal is to empower the client to make their own decisions, because if we are just giving our advice, that doesn't necessarily make them want to take it. And it doesn't enlist in like long-term change, because essentially what we want to do as a therapist is build their skills so that they have the ability to, solve their own problems in the future. So they're not reliant on a therapist to come and be like, what do I do now? This has happened now. Like, you want them to be able to learn like how to effectively manage their symptoms or, whatever it is that's going on in their life on their own. So it depends on, you learn about all the different like treatment modalities, so that it looks different depending on what your kind of home base is. We do like a lot of CBT kind of based therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's really about like just like highlighting like their cognitive patterns. So what kinds of thought patterns they're having. Are they maladaptive? If they're maladaptive, then you're kind of highlighting that and showing them how they're maladaptive, and you're challenging those thought patterns so that they can see that they're not necessarily adaptive. So kind of makes sense. Does that kind of answer your question?
Absolutely. Sorry.
There's so much. Your dog.
My dog barks every time I'm doing that. Quiet. Okay. Yeah, that definitely does. I also just had a question too, because one of a paper I did was, especially with like at-risk youth with conduct problems specifically, they tend to use multi-systemic therapy. Is that something you guys use ever? And
so again, it's like we don't really do therapy. So I would say like of the therapeutic like modalities, like pieces of it that we do use like cognitive behavioral, we do use like motivational interviewing. I would say like we don't really like use actual therapy though. So that's why it makes it difficult. I think I have heard of that modality being used with like teens at risk, like a lot of like juvenile delinquent teens and things like that. That's a therapy that they use a lot. In our program specifically, we wouldn't use that, but I definitely think that they do use that in general with that population.
That's interesting. Awesome.
Yeah. Is
Um,
that where you want to go?
I don't, yeah, maybe. I definitely want to work with like at-risk populations in like juvenile diversion programs or something like that. Because
Okay.
I loved my experience working in the juvenile halls, as frustrating, of course, as the policies are, but that's a whole nother issue.
Yes, that's something that you'll all learn.
Yeah, working within bad policies is just fun.
Mhm.
So another thing you also mentioned was that, and I wasn't sure if this was necessary or something you just wanted to do. Do you need hours prior to applying to the MSW program at SDSU?
Yes.
Okay.
So it says, I mean, when I applied, I'm sure, I don't know if this part has changed. I would definitely recommend checking on it. But when I applied, they required 500 hours of experience. So it could be volunteer, it could be work experience, but it had to be like somewhat tied into social services in a sense. So for me, my experience volunteering at the homeless shelter was where I got a good chunk of my hours, and then I finished those hours when I was working as a behavior coach. I think when I started like looking at the application, I was like really stressed out about what those hours can look like. I think that they're more flexible with them than you think. Like I think working in like a helping kind of profession or like a helping role is kind of where they are looking for, like just something that shows that you can
Awesome.
tie it to social work. I think you can be kind of creative and you can talk about it in your personal statement. But I would just double check on those. And if you ever have any questions about those 500 hours and what would count and what would not count, you can always email the admissions people. They're super friendly.
That's awesome. Thank you. Let's see. So, like you mentioned, you went to SDSU for both undergrad and master's. Did you enjoy your MSW program at SDSU? Was there anything you wish maybe they emphasized more, or your thoughts in general?
Well, I love SDSU as a school in general. I did like our program. I think for myself, the first year classes like were really, they were pretty broad. And like I said, like we didn't get a ton of really like specific instruction about treatment modalities. I think that's one thing that the program itself is lacking. And that's why I think if you're really sure that you're going to be a therapist and that you want to do therapy, the MFT program does a lot more of that, like really in-depth kind of teaching about the different modalities. We really like, I felt like it was very basic. I still feel like there's so much for me to learn, which is why I think it's good that you don't graduate and then get licensed right away.
Yeah.
I think it's good that you have to accumulate hours. Um, that's one thing I feel like the social work program in general is lacking, because they try to like, you can do all these different things with it. You can go, I did the direct practice track, but you can also do like the macro track, which is where you're more like looking at it from a community perspective or from an administration perspective. And that is like, you like don't focus a lot on treatment modalities in your second year at all. So I think it really just depends on like what your priorities are. I still think it was the best program for me, but of course, like I've also gone to trainings after my program. Like I did a CBT training that was like a 5-day training recently. So there's still so many opportunities to learn that I don't feel like I missed out. It's just that in those moments, like as a student, I was like, I wish I knew more about this, like as I'm practicing these skills. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I would say.
Awesome. And on that, I guess even prior to going into graduate school, was there anything that like you just wish you had known, or like resources you wish were more readily available or talked about? Because you did mention like going from, IO to MFT to eventually social work.
Yeah. I feel like for me, I just wasn't like open to things, which is why I kind of like put things off. I would say it's not bad to like go into the psych advising office like early on and talk about the different options, because like it's, you get really caught up in like the day to day of college and all your classes and everything, and sometimes it's hard to do that like future planning. But it is super important, and I think it can really make a difference in like your career path. For me, I was in the office on a weekly basis, and I knew all that information. So I think that part I did pretty well on, but I just also was like very focused on giving the information out instead of using it for myself. So I would say for advice wise, like just go to the psych advising office and like explore and talk with people and start to like figure out what things sound interesting. Because if you wait and like I did, then like I was like panicking my senior year, even though I knew all the information, again, just did not take it to heart for myself. So
Yeah. Do you think it's a really important step for students to kind of reach out to someone in the field of their interest and really like you mentioned, having coffee with someone who
yes,
really kind of solidified your interest?
100%. I think it can be uncomfortable to do that, to reach out to somebody, especially if it's somebody that you don't know very well. I say she's a family friend, but technically she's my friend's family friend. Like it wasn't actually that close of a connection. That was the first time I'd ever talked to her. And it was a little bit like weird, just like kind of reaching out. But then she was so excited to tell me about her career. And I think most people who love what they do would be equally excited to tell you about their career and give you advice. And I think that was super helpful because I did so much research online about like what you do in this job and what you do in this job. And I don't think that it ever really like truly captures what you do unless you talk to somebody and ask them about what they do. So I think that definitely was a huge thing for me. I don't really know the best way to go about finding people, but start with your psych advising office. Like, honestly, I think that that's the best place to start.
Your professors, the psych advising office. Even for me, I got some of my guest speakers on Psychology Today, like Dr. Sarah Hickman, who's a sports psychologist. I looked her up and I was like, hey, I teach this class. Would you be willing? And the best thing about being in a behavioral science field is it is collaborative. People want to kind of help and give back. So you really shouldn't be scared of reaching out to people to get that information.
Yeah, and the worst thing that will happen is that they say they don't have time and then you just move on. Like, it's fine.
Exactly.
It doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah. No skin off. It's not like you're interviewing for a job, you know. And there's information on how to conduct an informational interview, and that will be extra credit if you find someone. Just my little plug there. Okay.
I remember those.
Oh, yes. You kind of already mentioned, so I know there are requirements regarding hours of experience and supervision. What does that kind of look like now for you?
Like for my license?
Yeah.
So to get, this is the fun process. So to get your license, after you graduate from your MSW, you need to acquire 3,000 hours. It sounds like a lot. It is kind of a lot, but they say it takes about 2 years. So if you're working like full time for 2 years, you should be able to get all of your hours. So really, like, that's not that bad. I mean, I'm already like 9 months into it and I'm a third of the way. So I feel like it's definitely like coming along. So you have to get 3,000 hours. You need to have supervision for that whole time. So each week you have to have supervision either in a group setting or an individual setting, or triadic. So you can meet with another peer and then a supervisor. And that's, if you have to pay for supervision, that makes it cheaper. My job covers group supervision, so I get group for free. And then if I need to get individual or triadic, then I pay for that myself. Some places cover both, which is the ideal. I have a friend who works for San Diego Youth Services right now who gets both for free. So that's what I would aim for. Because you do need 52 weeks of individual in total. So I'm kind of nearing that point where I really need to get going on my individual supervision. And then also you have to do, there's like some required like coursework after graduation. It's like not that much. It's like a 6-hour course on this or an 11-hour course on this. And it's just stuff that you can do online, but just like extra things that you need to complete. And then you need to take a test. Once you have all of your hours, you submit a packet kind of documenting all your hours, and then you'll get approval to take the licensure exam. And then once you take the exam, if you pass it, you know immediately, and then you're immediately licensed. So that's cool.
Yeah. So I know kind of how licensure works as far as like, you know, PhD, whatever. sure it's similar for social work as well. Do you have to so you get licensed in the state that you are working in, and so if you went
Yeah.
to a different state, you would have to get relicensed?
It depends. So where I looked into that because I was thinking about moving for a time. So not anymore, but so in California, we have like one of the strictest licensing requirements, which is really honestly in our favor because if you get licensed in California, most places that you go, you can transfer your license without having to do any extra coursework or anything like that. You may have to do like a law and ethics exam for that specific state because obviously the laws are different state to state.
Yeah.
So like for mine, I had to do a California law and ethics exam, but like it would be different for a different state. So that might be a requirement. But in general, from what I've understood, you can move to most other states and get it transferred relatively easily without having to go back through the whole process. Or even take an exam. I don't think you need to take the licensing exam again. And then I was going to say something else, but I forget my train of thought.
It happens. It's a weird thing. What does the license exam kind of like require? Are you currently studying for it?
No, I'm not studying for it. I probably won't start studying for it until like a few months before the exam. Probably honestly until I submit my packet because that takes a while sometimes to get that through. It's a 4-hour exam. They have a ton of materials that you can get to study for it. I've heard of like some really good websites that have been helpful. A couple of my friends have taken it and have passed recently, and they've done their studying through Therapist Development Center, which is like an online course that you buy, and it has like audio lectures and materials and things like that really help in practice tests. So I studied for my law and ethics exam on that and I loved it and I passed. So I'm going to probably do that for
that's
the
awesome.
licensing too. But yeah, it's a lot from what I've heard, and then people get really stressed out about it. But like if you do like a study program, really you're pretty much going to pass. They have really high passing rates if you do like one of the study programs and you do it completely. So I wouldn't let that scare you.
Yeah. In any field, especially if you're going to be working directly with people, you're going to have to take multiple exams once you graduate. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's not as many as college. Like most of my free time, I don't have to study, which I remember doing all the time. So,
yes.
So that's nice.
Absolutely. So let's see. What kind of experience should someone have by the time they apply to graduate school, and is it research necessary for this degree?
Research is not necessary, which was a big plus for me because I'm not a fan of research. They do have a couple research classes like in the program. I think that they're pretty basic. Like there's a stats class, but it's like really easy, like really easy. So it's not something that I was stressed about at all. They really like focus on, for our program, like wanting you to be able to consume research, not produce it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the angle that they take more, because we have to obviously be able to keep up with research in order to, provide therapy and like the most up-to-date modalities and things that are proven to be effective. So as far as like experience getting into the program, myself, I had a whole year's working experience of the behavior coaching, and that was great for me. I also had friends who entered the program and it was like a complete career shift. Like they came from like an English program undergrad, and then I had another friend who came from like an art background. So like, I don't know necessarily what their experience was like that they used for their 500 hours, but you don't have to be like all social work or all psychology to get in. So you can, I would say, like, again, just direct your questions about experience to the admissions office, because I know that kind of stuff changes a lot. But what they really want to see is that you have a passion and like a focus to do the work, essentially. Like, regardless of your background in your personal statements, as long as you can like convey your interest and your passion for the field, I think that is really helpful.
Absolutely. Are there any like classes or like clubs you wish you had gotten involved in which may have helped, or like was advising pretty solid enough?
I feel like advising was really good. I honestly don't remember the clubs that were available in undergrad. It's been quite some time.
Right? It's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That's a good
Yeah,
question.
thank you.
I would say is that a student question or is that your personal question?
I think it's mine.
Hmm,
Mine.
okay.
I swear I'm
I'm
not
sure
stealing
about it.
a question from a student. Oh my god.
um,
You guys.
I would say, just as far as clubs go, I don't know what ones are available, but I mean, if you have an interest in one, it doesn't hurt to just go.
Yeah.
That's my
Cool.
thought. Yeah.
Awesome. So now we've talked a little bit about education and your general path. Let's get in more to career questions.
Okay.
So, what would you say is probably like the most difficult part of your current or previous positions and the most rewarding parts?
Of my current position or my both?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, let's start with current because that's freshest on my mind. The most like challenging part I would say is just like I personally am not a fan of documentation. That is like not why I got into my job, but my job requires a lot of documentation because we do bill Medi-Cal. And so they have all these requirements that we have a pretty crazy amount of documentation. So that's not my favorite part, like sitting in front of a computer and just typing away is not fun. But the most rewarding part has been like seeing some of the results that we've been able to achieve with our kiddos. I've had a few kids in foster care that have come really far, and like one of them who was adopted out of a group home and things like that. So that like to me is like that made my whole month. I was like, this is amazing. So I think like the kind of like administrative feeling like tasks are boring, but I think ultimately like it results in these incredible stories. Not all the time. I mean, we do get cases that don't work very well, but you know, obviously we do this because it works a lot of the time, and I think that that is obviously the most rewarding part of it because we want to incite change. So
Yes, absolutely. And on that, like, because you know it is a really difficult population you are working with. How do you prevent burnout, or like, have you seen burnout of those around you?
yes. Yes. So I mean, it's just pretty well known that like if you're in this career for a long time and you even if you do try to take care of yourself, like people do get really tired of it. For me, I think I know that, and as of right now, I'm still so early in my career that doesn't really I don't feel those effects because like for me,
Yeah.
I really try to put my work away when I go home. I think that's like my biggest thing is like I really strive for that home like work balance. Um I think like also moving forward, like I'm not planning on like if I become a school social worker, I know from my experience and from what I've heard is like it's a very strenuous job. Like it's very busy. There's a lot of like crisis things, like situations you're responding to sometimes depending on your school. And so that's a job that I want to have. I don't know if I will plan to have that forever. I think like I've seen people kind of do different career changes and like to kind of keep their interest and also, you know, pose new challenges, but also like relieve yourself of like some of the burdens of, you know, your specific job. So one of my graduate school professors, she's a school social worker and she worked in a school for like 11 years. And then she started to taper off and did that part-time and then opened her own private practice part-time and then started to learn about like play therapy and became a registered play therapist. So like she was doing all these different kind of changes to continue to like learn and grow and like move her career path along instead of like staying in the same place. Because I think one of my coworkers has worked at our program for a really long time and like she's a little bit burnt out. So I think if you're able to kind of like change as you go. Like, unless if you find something that you really love and you don't feel that you're going to get burnt out, like, then that's fine. But when you're working with like crisis situations and really high risk populations, like, you do get really tired and it's very taxing. So you just have to kind of, I think, prepare for that and think of ways that you can like make changes and like keep yourself motivated in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't feel comfortable answering my next question, totally fine. But on that, have you experienced like a very high stress situation? Like, can you give an example of that, maybe with a client or just a general group, and kind of how do you handle this?
Yeah. So confidentiality, but I do have a client that's really high risk. She's on my caseload, and this is her second round of TBS in a row. So she unfortunately has, a lot of like really intense symptoms, and she has been in and out of the hospital repeatedly. Like, we'll go home for like a few hours and then we'll be taken again by the police on a 5150 for like attempts to harm himself or others. So that has been a super, super challenging case for me, and one that I have had trouble like putting my work phone away on the weekends because I'm like anticipating things to happen over the weekends. So that has been super challenging. And I've had to like talk with a bunch of different people trying to basically find a different placement that's going to be better for her, because this is one of those situations where we're trying to prevent her going to the hospital or from going to a group home, but like she can't be at home right now. It's not safe for her. It's not safe for her family. So for me, like getting through that case, what's helped me is like really consulting with our clinical supervisor, consulting with just my case manager supervisor, with our program manager, just like trying to find other ways that I can help. Because for me, as just a case manager, I feel kind of like helpless in the fact that like I can't really do anything to help those situations. So that has been hard for me, but like really consulting has made it a lot better. And like I've talked to this caregiver like so many times on the phone, and just providing her support has been kind of my role in all of this. And not that it's like helped the outcome at all, but I think like day to day, it's like the best that I can do, and the kind of just being able to accept that like I can only do what within my power.
Absolutely. And on that, I guess, again, are there any like skills that you are using pretty regularly that you weren't aware of, or skills that students should really focus on honing in for this kind of work?
Active listening, I feel like, is the number one. Like, you have to be super present and super like responsive when you're in these situations, like whether you're meeting in person or you're meeting over the phone. Like, you have to be like really attentive and like really empathetic and really supportive, which can be hard sometimes because like you'll have situations where like you don't necessarily agree with how the person is handling it, and you have to like be able to kind of mask that and provide support anyways. I think that that's been a challenge sometimes, because again, we're not here to give advice, we're here to support and to kind of like help move forward. But when we have differences of opinion, or you have to be able to like explain that, but like in a really gentle way. So that's kind of challenging. I don't know if there's really a way that students can like foster that skill. I think that just comes with like time and experience. But that's just something that like I think people who are in this field get better at with time.
Absolutely. And I would even potentially argue that, not argue, but, that even being able to be in class, in a big class, small class, whatever, being able to like nod your head towards the professor, take down good notes, like that's all part of active listening. Coming up with critical questions that are important. Those things are going to be very helpful in acquiring the skills of active listening, because you can't just passive listen, because then the client's going to be like, well, what did I just say? Like, you're not giving me anything back. I have no knowledge that you heard what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So I would say take your classes. Like, part of classes is preparing you for the workforce. And if I know it's really different now online, but if you can actively listen, work on like making eye contact, eye nodding, and taking good notes, that's a good
Yeah.
start.
That's a really good point. And honestly, you'd be surprised, like if you actively listen, like how fast the time goes versus like passive listening. I feel like that's something that I have noticed, like when I was doing therapy with adults at my first internship and was like really like having to be engaged for a whole hour, like it flew by so fast. So I feel like that's something that people don't necessarily realize if they're kind of stuck in that, like, I'm just going to scroll through like
Yeah.
Pinterest or whatever, because that was my go-to in undergrad. Instead of listening. I think, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's going to be easier in classes that you're actually interested in than those that
Of course.
but you know.
Yes. And there always are those ones, but
let's see, was there anything else I really so here's another question. Do you believe your job is more fulfilling in helping a broader range of people by pursuing the master's degree in social work? And if so, do you suggest students with an interest in empowering marginalized communities kind of take that similar path?
Yes, 100%. Social work is all about empowerment. That's one thing that I feel like was really weaved through so many of my classes in my graduate program. And as a social worker, like you really do work with those marginalized communities. So much of our work has been, you know, empowering caregivers to stand up for themselves, to advocate for their rights and for the rights of their kids. Like in the school system, for example, like schools don't provide like IEPs unless the parents ask for them. And so many parents who don't know the system don't know that. So like empowering parents to ask for what they deserve. I think that that's a good example of how we empower our caregivers. But so much of social work is all about empowerment. And I think that if that's what you're looking for, you would fit right in a social work class.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's kind of the majority of questions. You touched on a lot of things. Are there any other or is there any other information you'd like to leave students with, or advice, or what have you?
I don't know. Good luck. No, it's not as scary as it seems. Grad school for me, as I said at the beginning, like I was so trying to avoid that, and I think I really underestimated myself. So I think that if you want to do it, go for it. It's totally achievable. I think it's a lot more achievable than people realize. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask somebody what they do for a day and have a informational interview. Because I think that all those things are really going to serve you and really are going to serve, the communities that you're going to end up helping in the future. Just get started.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jen.
You're
is it
welcome.
okay with me if any students are interested to share your email? If they have questions. Awesome.
Totally fine.
All right. Well, we really appreciate having you. I think students will really benefit from this information, and thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.